Hello, my name is Bernard Alaka. I'm here to talk about an automated policy and regulation framework for data dissemination in cloud environment. This is what we term as the ethical switch. It's a research we've been doing together with Dr. Shibwabo from Strathmore University. The motivation for this study was computer ethics, particularly the enforceability of the same, specifically in the cloud environment. We acknowledge that there have been already significant features or approaches that have tried to take keen note on the same. For instance, breach notification, hefty financial penalties, and data protection. Whereas the previous policy and regulation approaches have seen significant breakthrough, we deem them as being more reactive than proactive. This is to say that to the point where punitive measures are being implemented, the violation of the policies has already taken place, which in most cases is normally too late, and the damage has already been incurred. The aim, therefore, of this research was to develop the ethical switch, which is the automated policy and regulation framework for data dissemination in the cloud-based environment, so as to enforce ethical adherence, not as a reactive measure, but as a proactive measure on the go. The objectives that guided this research was first to investigate the existing challenges for policy regulation, particularly in the cloud-based environment, which led us to review the existing approaches and techniques used to implement the same. We went further to develop the proposed ethical switch and validated it to see how effective it is. We employed a mix of qualitative models together with the mathematical formalism so as to bridge cybersecurity theory and the architectural models that we reviewed in our literature. The hypothesis that we put front, or the hypothesis that we have, was that the proposed ethical switch will enforce ethical adherence for data dissemination in cloud environments. As such, the experiments were dual in nature. First, to show how ethical adherence is enforced, and secondly, to show practicality of the same with regards to what we are referring to as the difficulty index, which I shall talk about in a moment. We used the CIA triad to bundle up our policies, because so as to enforce ethical adherence, we need to come up with policies or laws that needs to be followed. And so we classified them under the confidentiality, integrity, and availability CIA triad. So for instance, if you look at IDC1, we have the policy, or the sample policy, that states that this data unit is intended for X number of users. If you look at sample policy ID I3, it states that the acquired data unit shall only be used for the stated X number of stated reasons as per the overseer's statement of purpose. I shall briefly talk about who the overseer is. If you look at sample policy A1, for instance, it states that the data unit of interest shall be available for X number of hours per day. Why this is the case, I shall explain when addressing the conceptual framework. There are a number of other policies that were also employed, but these are just a sample that kept on coming up in the experiment. So this here is the conceptual framework, which is divided into 3 regions. The region shaded blue is the data definition region. Region shaded green is the policy iteration region. Region shaded yellow is the ethical switch region. The ethical switch region is the core of this study, but already, as you can see, it is dependent on the previous 2 regions, that is the data definition and the policy iteration, for each to be effective. Starting with the data definition, we have the data delegates as one of the users or one of the user types. Then we have the data overseer as the other user type. The data delegate could be the data producer or the one who needs the data, for that matter, the data consumer. The overseer is an individual or body nominated by the data delegates to oversee the traversal of a set of data units throughout the ethical switch framework. As you can see, we represent it in form of a timeline, and it is sequential to that manner. And so the overseer is in charge of making sure that the traversal of the data unit maintains its integrity throughout the timeline of the ethical switch. So what happens is the data delegate initiates cloud sharing, where they will either request for, or for this case, let us say they place the data on the cloud. What follows is we are assuming the overseer has already been nominated. The statement of purpose will take effect. What is the statement of purpose? It is simply what we had talked about previously under the CIA triad table. So we have a set of sample policies or a set of policies that are attached or bundled up together with the data. So these policies are stated once the data has been put on the cloud and wrangled together in the data wrangling component with the data unit. So the data unit together with the statement of purpose is put together side by side as a data unit. Further on, encryption, which is important, happens. Multiplexing is an optional stage, may or may not take effect. Once that happens, the data unit traverses from the data definition region to the policy iteration region. In this phase, the data is deployed in the staging area where it will be accessed by yet another delegate who requires the same data for a given number of reasons. The assumption made here is data stays on the cloud and does not in any way move to the local machine of the data delegate requesting the same data. As such, we have the data streaming component, which streams the data carefully in unit form. Why this happens is because as it streams, it checks against the statement of purpose if the data delegate is adhering to these standards. Are they using it for the reason they say they will use it? Are they using it the number of times they say they will use it? And so on and so forth. So each policy is cross-checked as the data is being streamed. So we're also assuming that as it is being streamed, the data is being used as well. By chance that a given number of purpose statements is not fulfilled, or a given number of policies for that matter is not fulfilled, the framework will proceed to the ethical switch region where it will close the data streaming for a given number of time units. The number of policies that lead to closing the data streaming is at the discretion of the person employing the ethical switch. It's adjustable to the data delegate's needs. Further on, if a given number of policies is adhered to, then the data delegate requesting for that data is rewarded, but in this case positively, by extending the time units, which we have also talked about. So that is how the ethical switch works. Behind the scene, we have the state transition diagram that aids the movement from one region to another. As you can see, the outermost layer is labeled CCC, which means confidentiality comes in first. Then the integrity, where we are setting the purpose of the data, comes in somewhere towards the middle region of the transition diagram. And finally, availability of the same is towards the outer layer. We have here the equations that inform the transition from one layer to another. We have the Bellman's equation of policy evaluation, as well as policy improvement. Why this is the case is because some policies may be rendered repetitive and as such should be overlooked after a given number of iterations. We have the Kalman filter for policy state weighting to inform us to what degree have the policies been implemented. If it is to a satisfactory degree, which is also at the discretion of the delegates, then a positive reward is given. If it has not reached the threshold, then a negative reward is enforced. To the right of my screen is the algorithm, which simply describes what I've talked about, how the ethical switch works. As you can see, we have two key variables here, which is the vector policy, that is simply the statement of purpose or the policies which are supposed to be adhered to, and the VU, which are the policies that have been adhered to by the receiving data delegate. We have the reward system somewhere here, where if the reward if the policies have been adhered to, then no punishment is given. If they have not been adhered to a satisfactory degree, then the streaming is closed for 60 time units or more, depending on how it is set up. We proceeded to conduct experiments on the same. And we bundled up both functionality, that is the activation and termination of the ethical switch, into one. For each of the 5 steps, there was a pass. That is, for the requesting of the data unit, there was a pass. Agreement or settlement of the policies, also there was a pass. The background usage bot, which checks to see if the policies have been adhered to or not, there was a pass. Checking the policy iteration for adherence or lack thereof, also there's a pass. And finally, the ethical switch passed. These were the precision results. 45 out of 50 of the benign requests were classified correctly. 39 out of 50 of the malicious requests were also classified correctly. 78 of the data units out of 100 achieved an ease of access. That is to say, when they were needed by the data delegates, they were easily accessed. When translated, this means that there was a precision of 80%, that is, which means that 20% of the laid down policies were misenforced. This is satisfactory, but still a little high. But we believe with more experiments and with more data units over the cloud, this is likely to get better. 78% of the controlled experiment correspondents, of course, registered their satisfaction. This is directly tied to the number of data units that were easily accessed. Thank you very much for your time. That has been my presentation. I'll be now open to take questions. Thank you.